Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Eddrick Show. I am your host, Eddrick Jerome. This is the place for intelligent conversation with interesting people. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell, and you'll get notified when I post content each and every week. My guest for today's show is the award-winning journalist, Claudia Rowe, whose powerful new book, Wards of the State, The Long Shadow of American Foster Care. The book shines a light on the systematic failures of the foster care system and its devastating pipeline to incarceration. Claudia is the recipient of a Casey Medal for meritorious work, and she's been published in the New York Times, the Seattle Times, and Mother Jones. Claudia's memoir, The Spider and the Fly, won the Washington State Book Award, and I'm pleased to honor and welcome Claudia Rowe to the show. Claudia, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. This is a weighty subject matter, so obviously you spent some time before you dove into it, but what motivated you? Why this subject now, particularly in a situation where there's not a lot of light being shown on the foster care system?
Well, you hit that right. It's essentially invisible to most people, and that's because all of its clients are minors. So all states will say, to protect their privacy, and because they're minors, we have to shield them for confidentiality. But of course, you can understand that, but that prevents a lot of scrutiny from journalists and others who would like to examine the outcomes of foster care and the psychological experience of being a kid in foster care. That's what I was really interested in getting at and in focusing on in this book. I really want readers to feel what it is like to be that kid in foster care, because 59% of kids who age out of the foster care system at 18 will experience some kind of lockup,
Mm.
whether in juvenile detention, or county jail or state prison, by the time they are 26. That is insane. This is a system that is supposed to be helping kids. And if more than half are um, either leaving foster care with some kind of criminal record because they've been in juvie, or shortly thereafter because they're poorly set up to function productively, that's a problem. And so that invisibility that you touched on really, it really galls me, because it leaves so many kids vulnerable.
The reason that invisibility really struck me is because several months back I had documentary filmmaker Cheryl Fabio, who's a dynamic Oakland filmmaker here in the Bay Area, and she did a documentary titled "Rising Tides," which is about the homeless situation in Oakland. And there, particularly, she talked about young people and homelessness, and she said that they're pretty much invisible. And so that just resonated with me about these kids are out there, they're going through all this trauma, and nobody sees them. So maybe let's dive a little bit more into why that invisibility exists, and what can be done in addition to books like yours to maybe shine more light on this problem.
That is that's a really difficult question. One of the things about this, protecting kids' privacy and confidentiality, part of that is sort of an implicit message of shame. Like, you should be, like, oh, it should be a secret that you're in foster care, as if there's something to be ashamed of. I am kind of puzzled by that, because I will tell you that every person I spoke to for this book who either was or was recently a kid in foster care was dying to talk to me about their experience, was eager to talk to me. Um, you asked at the beginning, why did I do this? Why did I decide to do this book? I did not set out to write a book about foster care. I was looking, actually, I've written a lot about juvenile justice and youth crime, and I was interested in a forensic psychologist who was possibly going to be testifying about what he thought the appropriate punishment should be for a teenage girl who had shot a man in the head and killed him while she was on the run from foster care. That's why I was there, because I was interested in this guy's work as a psychologist working with juvenile homicide defendants. It ended up that he never testified, but this young woman, this teenager, um, who had by this point pled guilty to murder. Her sentencing stretched over 3 days, and her defense team was attempting to make the argument that foster care was partly to blame for what she had done, for her behavior. That really intrigued me. And that's why I then moved away from this forensic psychologist and refocused on this young girl, and then more broadly on a half dozen kids in the foster care system, and how exactly had the system sort of channeled them into brushes with the law. That's sort of how that evolution happened.
You mentioned the young lady among the other subjects who you talk to and tell their story in this book. One of the things I'm sure you had to do was to gain their trust. And obviously they trusted you with telling their story. So how did you foster those relationships? And what was it that made them trust you to be able to tell their story to the world?
Well, I'm a reporter, a print journalist. I've been in journalism for more than 30 years, and almost all of that time I've been covering juvenile justice, child welfare, and public education. So I have some familiarity with the terrain, but frankly, all kids in foster care have so many adults coming through their lives, whether those are social workers or lawyers or therapists or foster parents or adoptive parents who may then send the kid back to the foster care system, as happened for at least two of the kids in my book. I mean, there are so many adults who sort of come through kids' lives and leave without warning, that I think, frankly, probably most of the young people in this book assumed I was one of those folks.
Hmm.
And, but it took 6 years to write this book. So I think probably from just staying around and keep talking to them and keep showing up on interviews and phone calls and texting. Um, Probably after a while, they either became, got so sick of me, they just, I don't know, gave up and believed me and trusted me. And I think, frankly, it has to do with sustained connection. And that's one of the points I make in the book. And that, the point about foster care in this book is not that it is filled with abusers and that's the problem. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that foster care, the structure of the system, undercuts connection. It moves kids around from home to home, back to their biological families, or then sometimes back into foster care or an adoptive family. Many adoptions from foster care fall apart. Kids go back to foster care. So they're moving around all the time. They are not forming sustained bonds with trustworthy adults. That has real psychological impact, serious results in kids' behavior. So that's what I'm saying about the system. And I think that's probably just by default as a journalist, that's where I was different from the system because I kept being around.
You mentioned the system and you talked about the number of people coming in these kids' lives. And I've had folks on the show before, and I have this theory, and I guess it's just, the way I view it. There are a lot of layered systems on these kids. There's the educational system, economic system, healthcare, foster care system. There's layer upon layer upon layer of judicial system, of systems on these kids. And sometimes those systems conflict. You mentioned the confidentiality, things like that. Talk to me about how these layers can weigh down on these kids and sometimes maybe even prevent them from either turning things around or getting placed in a better situation. Talk to me about that part.
Two things come to mind. First of all, kids in foster care are at a serious disadvantage if there is any encounter with law enforcement. Say, so running from your placement is very common, particularly among adolescents in foster care. When kids run, they get hungry, right? So they're likely to shoplift or allow themselves to be trafficked, whatever it might be, to get food and shelter. Inevitably, they're going to be picked up by the police, right, and put into juvie. Or if they've committed some kind of serious crime, they're again going to be picked up by police. However, in the judicial system, a kid in foster care is at a real disadvantage because many judges, many juvenile court judges, as you know, favor diversion, and they want to send kids home to a parent who is going to provide some kind of oversight. Maybe they'll have an electronic bracelet, so they only go to school and home, or, approved places. But in general, judges, if they can, if it's not a serious violent crime, are going to lean toward not locking a kid up, and they want to release a child to their parent. But a kid in foster care does not actually have a real parent, and foster parents are not the same as a biological parent. They are paid a state stipend to essentially provide room and board. They are not there as kind of deep therapists or to provide like ongoing oversight or, monitoring within their home. That's not their job. So a kid in foster care is going to juvie almost unanimously. So that's a disadvantage. And that's a way that different systems deal differently with one kid who is in foster care versus another kid who commits the same crime, perhaps, and is not. Another thing that I found through the research in this book was that there's a young man who grew up in foster care in New York City. He spent a lot of time in group homes and sort of trudging around the city with all his stuff in a garbage bag, his clothes, his food, his birth certificate, really sort of intermittently homeless, very itinerant, and growing up in group homes. At some point, he got booked for assault. He was gang involved, and he got picked up, after a fight and sent to juvie, booked for assault. His public defender, finding out that he was a foster kid at that age when he was 16, put him on the New York City Housing Authority list for subsidized housing, for an apartment, cheap apartment. His name finally came up when he was 22, and happily and luckily at a place where he could move into that apartment. But he marveled to me again and again that nobody in foster care had ever signed him up for that list. It was, in fact, the legal system, his public defender, who put him on that list. It's another example of the ways systems, we can just say, don't work together,
right,
to help, to recognize these kids and help them. There are all kinds of places where kids are falling through the cracks, is a cliche, but it does happen, and that's a good example.
You touched on it. Obviously, there's a pipeline to the criminal justice system for many of these kids. When did you kind of first start picking up on that doing your research, and maybe give me an example of just how pervasive this is, and what you were able to find out when you start looking into it?
So in the early 2000s, in roughly, I think 2007, 8, in there was research coming out, really robust research that came up with the finding I cited before, this 59% of kids experiencing some kind of lockup, either while in foster care or shortly after leaving the system. That number really blew my mind, and I couldn't believe that people weren't talking about it all the time. 59%? That's a lot of kids. There's 500,000 kids in foster care every year, existing in that system. That's a lot of children experiencing lockup. I wanted to sort of drill down into that number. And when I encountered that young woman in court, her name is Marianne, she sort of brought this right back up to the surface of my mind. And so in doing the research, it turned out that there are really 4 aspects of foster care, really common things that seem to propel kids toward a locked cell one way or another. One of them is running away, as I just explained before. Kids run away from placement. It's really common, not because generally they're not usually running from an abusive foster parent. They are more often running toward something, often toward their biological parent who gave them up. They're looking for that person, or toward other kids on the street with whom they feel they have some sort of commonality, some kind of bond, someone who gets them. Again, looking for connection, right? So running away is one of the ways that kids end up locked up. Another is group homes. If you are in foster care and you are a teenager and you haven't been adopted, it's very likely you're going to spend the rest of your time in so-called care in a group home. In group homes, there's a lot of fighting. Kids might assault each other, steal from one another, might assault staff, and the cops come. And that's another way, somebody's going to juvie, right? That's another way, that's another reason that number is so high. The two last things are adoptions that fall apart. When adoptions fall apart, as happens often from foster care and is really under acknowledged by the system, those children also tend to land back in a group home. And the fourth thing is aging out without support, aging out at 18, likely with a very spotty education because you've moved around so much, and about half of foster kids never even get a high school diploma. They drop out. So you're 18, maybe you have a high school diploma, but you have no family support, you have no money. Fewer than 5% of those kids ever get a 4-year college degree. So you have like very spotty education, no family support. How are you gonna support yourself to, pay for an apartment in an expensive city like San Francisco or Seattle, where I am, or anywhere else? I mean, it's almost ready-made homelessness, right? And all that goes with it. So those are sort of the mechanisms or like the choke points within the system where we could really focus and make some changes.
Obviously, when you're writing about such serious subjects and you're immersed in it, and you just see all of the trauma and all of the just the angst that goes on in the system. But having said that, you have to have hope at some point. Are there any aspects that you came across that give you hope that maybe there's a chance for some comprehensive solutions, or
Yes.
is the system so much built up on inertia that it's just never going to change?
Well, inertia is real. You said that word is the right word. I mean, this is an inherited system. It is largely unchanged in the last century. We've had foster care roughly as it exists now for about 100, 125 years, and it's not that different. So there is real inertia. There is also, however, I think at this moment, finally, a real willingness broadly among people not in the foster care system to begin to connect the dots. How does foster care drive mass incarceration and homelessness? How does that system, that invisible system, drive the numbers and the expense in these very visible social systems that we all wring our hands over all the time? So that is one reason for hope. People are beginning to get it. Another reason is that there is an effort called kinship care, and it has been driven by one of the young people I profile in this book. His name is Sixto Cancel. He never went to prison. He became an incredibly dynamic activist, also really young. He grew up in foster care in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is a tough town. If your listeners and your viewers don't know that and they hear Connecticut and they think country clubs, no, Bridgeport is a tough, tough town. Sixto grew up there in foster care, was adopted into a disastrous situation, begged to be returned into foster care. And that experience made clear to him the importance of kids being placed with family. This is tradition. It's called kinship care, so that you're removed from your biological family because you can't be safe there. But you're not placed with a stranger. Instead, you're placed with a relative, someone who knows you, who has some connection to you, and to whom you feel some kind of bond as a kid. This is new. It has been roundly discouraged for almost all of the time that we've had foster care. The thinking being, oh, if you come from a struggling, dysfunctional family, probably all your relatives are a mess too, and we should just obliterate that ugly past and send you on to some like shining perfect life that has none of these old ties to your family history. That was kind of the thinking, I guess, well intended, maybe, but really denigrating also to a kid's past, and most importantly, not realistic. This is not how human beings operate. Humans have bonds. They're like inborn ties to your family, no matter what they've done to you. And so Sixto, who has become kind of a regular at the White House through 3 presidential administrations, Obama, Trump, and Biden, has been able to push kinship care as a more common placement option. So putting kids with family. And it does have, it's not perfect, but it does have better outcomes. That's another reason for hope.
Um, Final couple of questions. When you immerse yourself in a subject like this, like you did for 6 years, it's probably every day you're involved and you're dealing with the stories of the tragic stories of these kids and just the system, and it's just really heavy, heavy, heavy subject matter. When you're finished with a book like this, and I ask a lot of writers the same question, what do you do when you're done to try to maybe decompress or just what's the after writing process for you like when you've gone this far into a subject like this?
That's a really good question. I guess I would say I'm kind of in it still, you
Mm,
know.
hmm.
The book came out only at the end of May, so I think I'm still trying to decompress. I will say that talking with the young people who are in the book, and some of them are no longer so young. I mean, they're all really adults now. Um, but hearing them feel seen um, is really gratifying, right? It's really it, and that's another thing you asked about reasons for hope. Another reason for hope is the sort of I don't like to use the term resilience because I think it suggests, oh, you have some sort of horror and then you bounce back and it's all good. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is sort of the determination to keep fighting, to keep surviving, and most important, to try to make the system better for the kids coming behind them. It's another reason for hope, but it also helped me. You asked about how I decompress. Seeing them keep trying to make their own lives better, make the system better for kids behind them, to tell their story. That's kind of how I decompress, I guess, hearing them.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, Claudia, if people want more information about you, I'm assuming the book is everywhere, Amazon, anywhere you get your books. Support local bookstores, by the way. Um, but if people want more information about you and the book, where can they go?
They can go to my website, which is claudiarowejournalist.com. You can write to me from the website. I'm on Twitter or X at Rowe Report, Facebook if they like that. And of course, any bookstore. Yeah, bookstore. The book is available everywhere.
Great.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org if you want to patronize a nonprofit, or your local store.
Great, great. Well, Claudia, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Congratulations on the book. And as I mentioned, you've been nominated twice for a Pulitzer. That doesn't happen to everybody. Real quick, what was that like when you found out that you were nominated for a Pulitzer?
Pretty exciting. Really thrilling. One was about youth gangs. One nomination focused on my coverage of youth gangs and what is it really to be in a gang. Um, and the other was about Catholic priests who were adopting kids and they weren't supposed to be. And that was
Sure.
quite a while ago.
Hmm, hmm. Well, Claudia, again, award-winning journalist, thank you for coming on the Eddrick Show. I really appreciate your time, and I hope we can chat again.
Thank you so much. I hope so too.
You're very welcome. This has been another edition of the Eddrick Show. My guest has been Claudia Rowe. Her new book, Wards of the State, The Long Shadow of American Foster Care, is available everywhere. Check it out. You will see foster care in a different light after reading this book. As promised, this is Intelligent Conversation with Interesting People. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell. You'll get notified when I post content each and every week. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode.